have a loud voice, I might not use the microphone all the time, but if you don't hear me, just raise your hand and you most likely won't understand me because of my accent more than hear me. So, the movie you just watched is a perfect example of crony capitalism. So what I'm going to spend about 30 minutes on is to explain where and what is crony capitalism and where does it come from. So economists don't use the term crony capitalism, they use the term rent seeking, which is nothing else than the fact that corporations and group of individuals are going to use directly or indirectly private resources to benefit from government privileges, right? So either in the form of protectionism, for example, they are going to have tariff quotas to protect them against government foreign competition, subsidies, or as in the case you just saw, the movie, government assistance in acquiring private property to pursue private benefits. Right, so in economics, we have a school of thought or a research program called public choice, which is defined as the economic analysis of politics. And that school, that trying to explain that most of what you see in crony capitalism is a result of several factors that we call rational ignorance, special interest groups, which are rationally informed, rational irrationality, right, and voters' myopia. Right? So that beautiful movie, a documentary called Battle for Brooklyn, is just another example of crony capitalism. Right? So I want to spend a few minutes or a couple of minutes talking about eminent domain and how it relates to the movie and the US Constitution. As you can see, I put in the background the US Constitution, right? Some efforts. The Bill of Rights, which is a kind of a first few amendments of the US Constitution, as the Fifth Amendment that says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation, right? That's a very common argument among economists to believe that under some circumstances you should have eminent domain, which means you should have a government being able to seize private property, compensate the owners with just compensation, which means in general the market price, right? If your house is valued at $500,000, the government will have to pay you $500,000 before they seize your property. But the argument is that you have to use that private property, that seizure, for public use, such as roads, bridges, for example, right? A public library, a public museum. Right? Why economists justify eminent domain? I think it's a kind of a bogus argument, but because there is a lot of actual examples that show that it's not actually correct. But the theoretical argument is that if you want to build a public road, what you have to do is that you will have to negotiate, bargain with each private owner of that property how much you will pay them for them to sell you the property. Those costs of negotiating agreements will be extremely high, and you will face under certain circumstances the possibility that one owner will be withholding and trying to ask you for as much money as he can, given you have a budget to build that road. It will be unlikely for you to be able to buy all properties, and therefore you will never be able to build that road, and therefore the society will suffer as a result because you will not have that road, right? Now, the key term again is public use. In 2005, there was a case in front of the Supreme Court called Miss Kilo versus the City of New London in Connecticut, where the argument was a private builder wanted to buy from Miss Kilo her house that she owned for generation and generation, and that private builder developer said, here you go, I'll offer you X amount of money, and Miss Kilo say, no, thank you. I don't want to sell my house. I love my house. I have upgraded my house. I have a beautiful sea, a view of the ocean, etc., etc. So what that developer did is went to the city council, the city of New London, and they took a vote, and they say, oh, well, this is going to be, that falls under the domain of eminent domain, so yes, we are going to seize that property and give it to that developer. Or Miss Kilo and a few people say, oh, hey, wait a minute here. This guy is a private developer who is going to build a private thing for which he's going to get private benefits and private profits. That does not hold. So they went to the Connecticut Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, the Supreme Court uphold the decision of the city of New London. So they went to the U.S. Supreme Court. What the Supreme Court says, the U.S. Supreme Court says, is that actually the city of New London had a legitimate argument in seizing using eminent domain because there will be a public purpose, which means that private developer, by developing new housing and parking lots and everything, will generate tax revenues for the city of New London. With those tax revenues, you will be able to serve the public, right? In addition, you will hire new jobs. Right? So we substituted the word public use to word public purpose that leads to public benefits, right? So it is not being used by the public, right? It is used by a private owner, a private developer that is going to generate profits, millions of dollars in profits, that will be taxable, and therefore the city of New London will benefit from that. Huh? So that case that you see in the battle for Brooklyn is nothing more, nothing less than the same thing than the Kilo case. Right. Now you're going to tell me, well, wait a minute. Don't we have mechanisms to limit government abuses, right? Don't we have mechanisms that will prevent the government to transfer private property to all the private owners so they can get private gains, right? Don't we have rules that prevent the government to become a player in the game, to change the rules of the game, to prevent the growth and abuses of the government, right? Thomas Hobbes talks about the Leviathan. Government has some basic functions, which is the protection of property rights, the enforcement of contracts, and the provision of public goods, which are the provision of goods for public uses. Right. Unfortunately, Thomas Hobbes says that when the government has a virtual monopoly of a force, the government will start abusing his duties and his powers and grow beyond what we want to grow. So the traditional mechanism to prevent the government abuses are voting, right? If you don't like Penn Jillette said, if you don't like the job that the president did, or the congressman that the president did, or whoever is in power, what are you going to do? Vote against that individual and remove him or her from office. You don't do your job, you are fired. Right? That's one of the mechanisms. Obviously, the strongest mechanism is the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution does what? Is to limit the powers of a government. It basically says what you cannot do, what you should not do. You cannot seize private property for public use without just compensation. Right? Now, who usually decides and supposedly read the Constitution every day and make decisions about what the Constitution says? The Supreme Court. Right? The Supreme Court is that entity of 9 judges that decide what does the Constitution say, what the Constitution can do, what the government can do or cannot do. Well, in the real world, this is not true. Right? Government, the U.S. Supreme Court has been again and again subject to public opinion pressures. Right? They are not independent, even though they are appointed for life, and you will assume they will be independent of any political influence or any public opinion influence. They apparently are not independent from those groups. Right? Obamacare is another case. It is the most recent case where the U.S. Supreme Court decided to reinterpret Obamacare and change the rules within Obamacare. Is not a penalty, is like a tax, therefore a tax is like a penalty, therefore is no longer subject to the Interstate Commerce Clause, but is subject to the Power Tax Clause. Therefore it's constitutional. Right? Even the people that supported Obamacare never argue that was a tax. They never said it's a tax. Actually, the Supreme Court made an argument for the proponent of Obamacare that even the proponent of Obamacare didn't want to endorse. Right? So there's a lot of literature that says, a lot of interpretation that says that Judge Roberts made a strategic decision for future cases in the future. Let's give them a little bit to the left, the Democrats, so in the future when the hard cases come, more conservative cases come, I can make stronger decisions in favor of the Republicans, of the conservative. Well, that's not what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. The Supreme Court is not supposed to strategize on political ideas and ideology. The role of the Supreme Court is to uphold the Constitution and to ensure that the government at any level or any individual does not violate the U.S. Constitution. So, I'm going to explain what is public choice says. Public choice is subtitled Politics Without Romance. Most of you are here already know those things, but I think it's good for you to remember those things in case you still have an idealistic view of what voters can do, what people are. Right? Economists start with an assumption is that people that operate in private markets are self-interested. Businesses try to maximize profits. Consumers try to buy the cheapest good possible at the highest possible quality. Right? Producers try to minimize their cost of production and at the same time maximize their revenues. Right? Public choice argue, well, when you look at the government of the political process, a lot of people have this naive view that politicians are supposed to serve the public. They are public servants. Right? Bureaucrats are also supposed to serve the public. They are also public servants. And voters, when they vote for decisions that will not affect them directly, that will benefit to the entire society. Right? So suddenly you are George W. Bush, you have the part of the Rangers, you try to maximize the profit of the Rangers, but suddenly you become president of the United States and you become a little angel with a halo and little wings, and you are no longer self-interested. Right? You're only serving the public. Right? Well, what public choice says, that's not true. Every members of a political process, whether they are politicians, bureaucrats, and voters, are self-interested in most cases. Right? Politicians try to maximize votes, so you maximize votes by doing what? By making promises to the voters. And you often promise things that they cannot even give. more than they can afford. Right? Bureaucrats, they just try to maximize their budget because bigger budgets means bigger salaries. Right? If you ever go to DC and you run in front of the IRS building, which I've done a lot of times, not because I'm trying to escape them, because I was just jogging around, you will have that magnificent scent of Cuban cigars just around the IRS building. There's obviously a lot of IRS agents that smoke a lot of cigars. Because I'm serious, go run in front of IRS, you can smell cigars. Right? So I know where my taxpayers' money is going. It's going to a bunch of cigars and nice cars and nice suits. Right? Why? Because they make big salaries. One of my colleagues just been hired by the post office as an econometrician for the post office. They pay him $125,000 a year, even though the post office is bankrupt. Huh. Oh, wait a minute. Where is that money coming from, therefore? Thin air? Thanks to QE3, it's coming from thin air. Right? What do voters want? Voters, they want the most out of the government at the lowest possible cost. They want a government that is going to serve them as individuals. And when I mean individuals, them personally, their family members, their friends. But they don't really care about the guy that lives in New York City. They don't really care about the person that lives in Seattle. They care about themselves. That's how people vote. Oh, I went the wrong way, sorry. All right. So what is rational ignorance? Right. We live in a democracy where people vote for a lot of things. If you live in California, they vote for pretty much everything. Every single thing. Right. Whether you should be able to eat foie gras or not, whether you should be able to smoke, whether in New York, whether or not you should be able to drink big gulp, giant size of sodas, they vote for everything. Right? Unfortunately, what economists figure out is that most of the time, voters know nothing about the thing they are voting on. They are what we call rational ignorant. Knowledge is power, but knowledge is costly. Right? To be knowledgeable about the effect of increasing tax or the effect of minimum wage, you have to be able to read policy papers, you have to be able to read empirical studies and statistical analysis studies. You have to be able to read a lot of things. And not everybody has an economics degree, not everybody has a PhD in economics, so not everybody knows necessarily the implications of whatever policies you are voting on. Therefore, what do most people do? They know nothing. They just vote on their guts. I think it's going to be okay. Or often they are deciding, well, wait a minute. That policy doesn't affect me because I don't earn minimum wage. So it's not going to affect me. Increasing minimum wage sounds good to me. Well, let's increase minimum wage because I already earn more than minimum wage. So those people that don't earn low wages should get higher wages. Right? They are really affected. Another aspect that people don't know is that your vote does not matter. It does count, but it does not matter. What is the probability that your vote is going to swing the elections one way to the other? Is it high? Low? All right, let me give you an idea. The probability that you are going to die in a car accident driving to the poll or coming back from the poll is much, much higher than the probability that your vote is going to change the outcome of the elections. Therefore, if you were an economist knowing that, do you value more your life or the outcome of the elections? Hello? What do you value more, your life or the outcome of elections? Oh, okay, so therefore you should not be voting. Right? We already know that people don't vote because they think they're going to change the outcome of elections. They vote because they think it's a way to express their opinion. They vote because they think it's their civic duty. They vote because they have nothing else to do. It's consumption time. Well, you know, I could watch the Broncos losing again, or I can just go vote. Well, let's go vote. It's a consumption good. It makes you feel good about yourself. You consume voting as something that makes you feel about yourself. Because I serve my civic duty, because I think I express my opinion, because my friends are going to like me, because I'm going to wear that silly stickers that say I voted today. Right? No impact. You know perfectly you have no impact. The problem is that most people, therefore, because their vote has no impact, they just express an opinion without being an informed opinion. Therefore, there's nothing wrong with voters not knowing anything when they vote on an issue, other than the fact that their decisions are going to affect the life of millions of other people. But is everybody irrationally ignorant? Well, no. There are people that are going to directly benefit from those policies that are very well informed. Right? Those people, we call them lobbies. We call them special interest groups. Right? Therefore, when there's a policy in place that they know will benefit them, they will spend a lot of resources and time trying to lobby the government to get that piece of legislation passed. So those are roughly a couple of years old data, right? Look at the number of lobbying in the last 13 years. You want $1.44 billion spent at the federal level to get the government to pass legislation and policies that are going to benefit you, to $3.33 billion at the federal level. It means that at the federal level you have a lot of money which is not being spent toward innovation, R&D, lowering the cost of production. You have $3.33 billion being spent to bribe the government, what we call lobby, to get policies that are going to benefit you at the expense of the consumers and your shareholders and the voters, who also are consumers. If you're in law school, the first job you should be doing is being a lobbyist. The number of lobbyists went from 10,000 in 1998 to 12, almost 13,000 in 2011. It's a profitable business because your job is basically to work for a corporation to ensure that the government is going to pass policies that are going to benefit your corporations, or to prevent policies that are going to harm your corporations. If you look at the left side, here's the different sectors that lobby. And here's the amount of money they give to both Democrats and Republicans. It's pretty even. Pretty even. It's close to be even. Right? Even Bain Capital, with a Mitt Romney corporation, right? Bain Capital give money both to Democrats and Republicans. Equally. Actually, in effect, they give more money to Democrats than they give money to Republicans. So, if the Democrats get elected, what's going to happen to them? They won't be heard by the Democrats. Right? It's difficult in the context of elections nowadays. Is the fact that Barack Obama has difficulties to be too critical of the financial industry because Barack Obama received as much, if not more money from the financial industry than Mitt Romney or any other political candidates. Right? That amount of money is not being spent toward productive, profitable activities. Is being spent toward redistributive, taxing activities to benefit your corporation at the expense of the consumers and your shareholders most of the time. Right? That's what is crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is all that amount of money that people are spending to benefit from government largesses. Now there's another argument that's been developed by Brian Kaplan that wrote a book called The Myth of Irrational Voters. He's trying to challenge the idea that voters are actually self-interested. Actually, voters are not self-interested, they care about people, they care about the society. But, they are not rationally ignorant. They actually voluntary, they don't necessarily think they're ignorant. They think they know already what is going to happen. They already know the truth. When they vote to confirm their biases. Markets are evil. Capitalists are bad. Steve Jobs and Zuckerberg are greedy. Therefore, we should vote for policies that are going to hurt markets. Therefore, we should vote for policies that are going to hurt foreign competition. Right? Policies that raise tariff, that prevents competitors to hurt your domestic industry. Right? So systematically, if you look at survey data, what you observe is that systematically voters vote against corporations in court cases or in votes. They will vote, they are highly anti-foreign, they hate foreigners because foreigners take their jobs, they take their money, they destroy the economy, etc., etc. Right? And they believe government is good, inherently good. Frédéric Bastiat was a French journalist that defined the government as this way. The state is the great fiction through which everybody endeavors to live at the expense of everybody else. Right? That's crony capitalism. The government is what? The rule maker. Is no longer an outsider. The government can change the rules of the game. And when somebody can change the rules of the game, what you should do is to talk to the guy that makes the rules of the game, try to get rules that are going to benefit you at the expense of everybody else. That's how it works. If the government had no power whatsoever to change the rules of the game, if the Constitution was actually working, right? If the Constitution had actually any teeth, you will not have so much crony capitalism. But because the government can change the rules of the game, so I'm going to skip those two things because you probably don't find. Right? If the government can change the rules of the game, it is in your interest to go play with the government, to lobby the government. Lobbying the government is nothing more than legal corruption. We just call it lobby because it makes it legitimate and legal. But in effect, is nothing more than corruption. Right? You spend millions and billions of dollars trying to get the government to do things for you. No. The most famous case was Microsoft. Microsoft before 2000 had no lobby office in DC. Zero. Didn't spend no dime on lobbying because they were committed to one thing: serving the consumers by selling cheap products of high quality. 2000 comes, antitrust case against Microsoft. What does Microsoft realize? The rules of the games are rigged. Because people went to see the government to try to get Microsoft being hurt by big policies. What does Microsoft do now? Spend millions of dollars in lobbying in DC. Right? Well, now that you are all depressed, I'm just telling you that basically your life is ruined for the rest of your life. You have nothing else you can do. Right? If I was very pessimistic and very rude, I would say the average voter is an idiot. Right? But it's not true. We know he's rationally ignorant. What are the solutions to that? Well, Todd is organizing for the second year now the Free Mind Festival. Right? The Free Mind Movie Festival. What's the film festival? What's the purpose of that? It's to educate people about what's going on. Right? Rational ignorance, it becomes too costly for you to be informed. We need to reduce the cost for you to be informed. We need to make easier for people, voters and general public, to get quickly informed. You cannot sit for an hour and a half listening to me talking about, supply and demand and rent seeking and marginal cost and marginal benefit and dead well loss. Right? If I want to get people to be interested in learning about economics, I need to make it cheaper for them to learn economics. 3 minutes is the maximum amount of time I should be spending talking to you on a single quick topic. That's what IHS and Learn Liberty do. They are short videos that educate people on critical issues, critical topic in less than 3 minutes. Give you a snapshot of what happens about minimum wage. What is crony capitalism? How voters behave. Things about, do the poor actually poorer than they used to be in the 50s? Right? Do you have huge income inequality? Right? Students for Liberty, trying to get students excited about liberty and learn about ideas and how to change the political process. Right? As an educator, my primary goal is to educate people about unpleasant truth. That's one of my syllabus things. This course is not about tree hugging and holding hands and beautiful people and everybody is nice. It's about unpleasant truth. And the unpleasant truth is the government has too much power and voters have too much power. Right? So the second thing is that you want to limit the government scope. Stop government trying to tell you what you should eat, how you should behave, what you should put in your body, etc., etc. That's beyond the scope of the government. The role of the government, as defined by the founding fathers, was to protect and enforce property rights and enforce contracts. It was to provide public goods, and that is it. That was the only thing the government was supposed to do. The government was not supposed to redistribute wealth around. The government was not supposed to tell you what you can say, what you cannot say, whether you can bear arms or not bear arms. The government is not supposed to tell you that. There's a big discussion on campus now that people are trying to lobby the government to allow campuses to prevent people to carry concealed weapons. The Constitution is clear. Universities, public universities, are state universities, and the state cannot prevent people from carrying concealed weapons. And because of that rational ignorance thing, and because people are very biased in general, both things going together, you should prevent people from voting on everything. Particularly on things that doesn't affect them. Particularly on things that they don't know nothing about it. How many people have taken an econ class here? It's like a quarter maybe? A tenth? How many people know the effect of minimum wage on employment? Increase or decrease? Yeah, in general the effect is disemployment, right? Decrease employment. Right? There was a recent study that's been done that showed, do you know what the effect of extending unemployment benefits on unemployment? Increase or decrease? Increase. Right? Now we extended the unemployment benefit to 99 weeks, I think it is. Right? Increase unemployment by 2%. 2%. Because you tell the people, we are going to increase your unemployment benefit. Most people will say, no, of course you should increase unemployment benefit. Those people should not be left starving. But if you give them money for not working, what are they going to do? Not working. All right? All right, I will take any questions. I think it's better when I stop here and I can take any question related to crony capitalism. I went 5 minutes over, so we have probably 10 minutes.
If you want to take 5, 10 minutes.
As many questions as they want to ask. No question. I was perfect, but awesome. No questions? Comments? You can make a comments if you want to. We are hungry, maybe.
Yeah, lunchtime.
Thank you for your time. Oh, you have wait a minute. Somebody has a question.
Well, yeah. Is it my turn or is it his turn?
Go ahead.
No, your turn. You have the attendees.
I was reading books about peak oil and things like that. A lot of the economy is based on peak oil and a lot of resources that are not sustainable. But yet that never plays into the economic formula. Why?
What do you mean by not sustainable? There's, if I may answer.
We run out of a lot of resources. Our sources are limited, yet our economy is based on cheap natural resources like oil and minerals or whatever. But that never enters into the equation.
A lot of the government economic GDP, right?
GDP is only quantity, not quality issue.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
You're talking to somebody that says you can, never mind. But yes, it's all about quality, not quantity. That's correct.
Yeah.
But it's a myth. We do have natural resources which are limited, but they are not, contrary to most people think, in depletion enough that we should be worried about it. 100 years ago, people thought we were going to run out of coal, and we have plenty coal. Right? So because if you allow the economy to develop, if you allow people to be innovators and entrepreneurs, they will find a substitute for those natural resources. If businesses that depend on those natural resources like oil benefit from government subsidies and are able to spend money to lobby the government to discourage innovation, to find alternative resources or uses or ways to get your car work, it was going to slow down the entire process. The problem is that crony capitalism, or what we call rent-seeking, this idea of lobbying the government, does not promote growth, it does not promote innovation, it does not promote R&D, and therefore you have less potential, you are way below your potential. Now, don't get me wrong, political freedom is very important, right? It's an essential right to have a freedom to speech, it's a right to have a right to vote, and to have a right to exercise your individual rights, which enters with the concept of political freedom. But you can have such thing as too much political freedom where when you have most of the people that, and don't get me wrong, Mitt Romney is wrong on this one, but the basic idea is not totally wrong. When you have too many people that vote but don't pay taxes, what do you expect they are going to vote for? They're going to vote for somebody who is going to give them benefits they don't deserve, but quote unquote will not have gotten if you will have to work hard and pay your job. But at the same time, Milton Friedman says you should not be surprised. If you pay people for not working, they're not going to work. And if you tax them when they work, what is the incentive for them for working? I come from a country which just passed a law, is trying to pass a law that you are going to tax rich people by 75%. Right? But I mean, what can you expect out of that type of things? Rich people that make millions of dollars or millions of euros, they're just going to leave the country. Right? And there's a lot, I'm not a specialist of energy economics, so I can't make a real informed answer about your question. But I do think there's a lot of literature on peak oil industry, and there's a lot of speculation on that market. But we have to be aware that that market is highly tied to government subsidies, government taxation, etc., etc. Yeah, I don't know if I answered completely your question, though. Probably not. Sorry. Yes.
What could possibly cut back on the lobbying, the money spent on lobbying? Because lawmakers are influenced by lobbying, so wouldn't you have to lobby to stop the lobbyists? Like, what are action steps to kind of correct that?
This is a difficult question that, as an economist, when I talk with my students about that, I have difficulties to answer, because in one way I see the inefficiency of lobbying, but on the other end you have corporations that do lobby to have less regulation, to have freer markets. I'm thinking about the coke industries that are from Kansas, right? They play both sides of the game because they have no choice, right? They benefit from government subsidies. The government gives them millions of dollars. If somebody gives them $1 million for doing nothing, we say, oh, no, I'm sorry, I don't want your money. Of course you're going to take it, but they also spend millions of dollars lobbying the government to reduce government interference in the market economy, trying to increase what we call economic freedom, less tax, less government subsidies, fewer government less government expenses, everything. Look, the United States is now ranked 18 on the Economic Freedom of the World report. They went from number 2 in 2000, I think, to 18 in 2012. In less than 10 years, we have Canada. I understand it's kind of a 51st state of the United States, but they went ahead of us. We have countries like Chile, either of us, countries like Hong Kong that has much less political freedom but a lot of economic freedom. Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, all those countries that have more economic freedom than do we do. So what's going to happen? In the long run, what's going to happen is that a lot of people are going to leave the United States. The brain drain will happen. And now things will get worse. I'm not saying like it's going to be so dramatic that everything is going to go down away. No, I would not be in favor of opposing lobbying, because there are people that lobby against government regulation, to prevent government to regulate. Ultimately, it's a difficult question. The question is that, do you want people to educate people, economically educate people, inform them at a cheap cost, so via the political process they succeed to reduce the government ability to change the rules of the game? Look, if I knew the answer, I would be Nobel Prize in economics. So I don't know the answer perfectly, so I'm never going to be Nobel Prize in economics. But Tyler Cowen gave an interview, and he thinks most economists think the idea is to educate people, right? To lower the cost for us, for you voters, to be informed about issues, so they make more informed choices, or at least they understand the trade-off they are incurring when they decide to support bailouts of inefficient businesses like GMC, Chrysler, AIG. I talked about that last week in my class, so I can tell you about that. Right? I mean, you want to protect American jobs. That's fair. That's a fair argument. You know, you are patriotic, you're nationalistic, whatever argument you want to put in. But you have to be understanding. You have to understand the consequences, the trade-off you are making when you do that. You support American cars? Fine. It means you will have less money for higher education, less money for supporting other industries, or, as in the famous case, you will have farm industry will lose revenues. There's this parable that David Freeman used, which is this magical thing. Iowa sends tons and tons, millions of tons of corn to Japan, and in return they get a bunch of cars. Right? Take boats of corn, send it to Japan, and in return the boats come back Japanese cars. Isn't that magnificent? Send corn, get cars. It's to support the U.S. automobile industry via subsidies, bailouts. Right? Subsidies will lower the cost of buying American cars. Right? What will happen to the corn farming, the corn industry in Iowa? They will sell less corn, so they will lose revenues. Or turn in ethanol, but they will still lose revenues in general. So I mean, it's not that I'm saying, as an individual, as an economist, a free market economist, I'm against any nationalistic things. I'm against subsidizing any industries. I'm against any bailouts. I don't see why you have the too big to fail is a wrong argument to support bailouts, because what does that mean, too big to fail? Every year you have thousands of businesses that get created. After a year you have thousands of businesses that go to bankrupt, they close. If you take those thousands and thousands of businesses that go to bankrupt, they lose thousands and thousands of jobs. Why should we not bail out all those businesses, and we should bail out those people for making inefficient, bad decisions? There's no economic argument that's valid that, other than, hey, it's my industry, I'm a pro-American, woohoo, go America, right? And it's a fair argument, but you have to understand the consequences. So my goal is, or the goal of any educator should be to educate people, that's all, in a fair, unbiased way. Right? So which means I should not put my ideological belief in my teaching. You can derive them, maybe, but it just happens that what I'm saying is like 99% of the economists agree with me. So, except for Paul Krugman, but Paul Krugman is no longer an economist. He's a blogger, and he's as much as an economist that Barack Obama is a peaceful Nobel Prize winner. Thank you. Yeah. I was going to say peaceful leader of a peaceful world, but no. All right.
Everything that you said seemed to tie economic and political freedom together. And yet you're saying that there are indexes that now show that there's a vast difference. So I don't understand why the vast difference between those. Why did the U.S. fall down to 18th economically? I don't get the difference.
So political freedom is the right to vote, freedom of speech, civil rights thing. Economic freedom is taxation, property, ensuring that your private property rights is being protected, less regulation, low debt ratio for the government. And the U.S. fell down because of their debt, national debt, a lot. We are the bankrupt. We all have credit cards. Sooner or later, you have to pay your credit cards, right? Apparently, the government doesn't have to. The debt ceiling has been raised like 13 times in the last 20 years or something like that. Or 30 years, excuse me. So that's why the economic freedom of the US has went down. On the other hand, all the countries, they have more balanced budget, they have less regulation of businesses, they have less infringement of property rights. Like the battle for Brooklyn is an infringement of property rights. It's an abuse of the government, where the government or the Supreme Court retranslate and reinterpret the Constitution so the city of New London can get to seize private property to benefit to a private owner. And it does matter, not because I say economic freedom matters, it's because empirical research shows that the more economic freedom you have, the wealthier you have, the less inequality you have, the healthier people are, the more business creation you have, the more innovation you have, and the more peaceful and socially stable is your society. Somebody raise their hand. Oh, let me talk with two questions. No, they're excited. Let's get them.
All right, do you guys want to keep going or do you want lunch? Keep going? Okay.
Sir.
I agree you have to educate them, but how do you do that when you have the media and most of the universities or whatever? It's like a fire hose of Keynesian economics being sprayed in their eyes.
Well, look, I teach at a public university. Obviously, I'm biting the hand that feeds me every day with great pleasure, actually.
Just do something. Start, organizing boycotts of any company who advertises with those stations. Start doing anything. Start education classes. Start educating your kids.
The idea is to really lower the cost of education, which means that when you show small videos like learning videos, you have the summer universities which are basically free for students. They get provided housing, food, and they only have to pay the flight ticket. They get a small stipend that will reduce the cost. But you have to get young people and older people excited about ideas. And right is very difficult. I'm not saying this is a battle we are going to win. But think about that. Milton Friedman spent a decade talking to government officials about abolishing the draft. He did succeed. So there is a long delay between ideology, ideas, the impact of ideas, and the impact of the government decisions.
This is actually going to be the topic of Isaac's lecture tonight after Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
How you change the world, how you do the social change.
I'll figure it all out, no problem.
Question. There was another question raising hand somewhere, quickly. Who was raising a question?
Well, it's getting to be rampant now that governments are actually bailing out and helping corporations. It's routine, like they're putting millions into GP up in Aurora, and Costco is often in the news where you can find them that they actually stop the store, private little enterprise, from going in next to them because they don't want the competition for their big store, even though they're so big. So things like that, if there was just one website we could go to just to check out on it, where everybody turned in information that they knew from their area, that would be really terrific. Just so that you could begin to see just what's going on to stop small enterprise, free enterprise from working.
There's a lot of websites. We're probably doing somewhat a bad job to advertising all this information sometimes, even though we do it more and more. Look, the bailouts of the two big automakers plus the banks just set up a precedent. You set a precedent to say, hey, now you can, pardon my French, because I'm French, I can say that, screwed up, and we will bail you out. The entire story is that taxpayers still believe that it's okay to bail out industries if they are Americans. And that's that Brian Kaplan idea of that people are biased against foreigners. So they are biased against foreign competition because they have this belief that competition is like a war, and if we give money to those foreign people, that makes us less wealthy. The pie is fixed in the mind of most voters when actually the pie is not fixed, it's flexible. We gain from trade, we do lose out of trade. And most people think there's a winner and a loser out of trade. We buy Japanese cars. This is bad for America. But why is it bad for America when you buy cheaper cars, which allows you to get more money to spend on other things? If we were still buying American still, for example, we probably won't have new technologies. We won't have that funny thing I have in my hands called an iPhone and that iPad. Or they would be more expensive. There's a trade-off. I'm a very understanding person. I learned over the years being an educator to become an understanding person. I'm a very understanding person. So what I'm trying to just say to people that talk to me is, look, there's a trade-off. I understand your argument, but you don't seem to see the trade-off of it. I'm just pointing out to the trade-off. As an educator, personally, not as a political activist, because I am first and foremost an educator. My goal is not to get people to vote in one way or another. My goal is to inform people of the costs and benefits of their votes. So if I want them to make an informed vote, if they understand that if they still want to support something, but they understand the trade-off of it, there's nothing I can say. Because it's their vote. They will be bearing the cost of their decisions somewhat. Mostly like me too, right? Because democracy says that usually it's the tyranny of the majority. So you will abuse a lot of smaller minorities. But as an educator, I'm not training for being governor. I don't have an Austrian accent. I only have a French accent. And I'm not that tall either, so it doesn't work very well for me. All right, I think I'm willing to take any other questions outside the session if you want to.